Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hope you're doing well. It's a hot day today. Boo! We need to live inside a refrigerator. And so it's a perfect time to read. Little one's taking a nap. The other one's doing her math. So Mama's gonna read some books. Okay. We're continuing our reading of this radical feminist book concerning the sexual revolution. Like I say, it's important to understand their philosophy if you are going to have any hope of persuading them towards Islam and leaving behind their dogma. If you can't understand what it is they're talking about, or you're reframing it in ways that are not actually accurate, they're just gonna shrug you off. And I do notice that there's a trend of calling everything feminism, and I find this to be quite awkward and inaccurate. So this will outline more structurally what it is their agenda is. This, I think, would be a part of the RadFem movement, so we'll go on that path. Let's begin. Complicity can curdle anyone's courage. It is extremely uncomfortable to acknowledge historical violence that has been done in your name. That's one reason why women and girls, gay and trans people, black and brown indigenous people remain bit part players in the notion of history, as it is simply and collectively understood. So I want you to notice something about her writing. She always puts trans and gays mixed with racial and indigenous folks, native folks. This type of umbrella grouping is sneaky, and I've actually heard the black supremacists complain about how BLM did this when they launched, because one of their founders was a lesbian, and all of them are trained communist Marxists, and they were against heterosexuality, so black heterosexual Christian men and other black Hebrew Israelite Black Panther supremacist types were arguing that this is a strategy that they do in order to sneak into certain movements and really bait and switch people. I don't like the comedian named Barricade Garage because he vehemently dislikes Muslims. But before I found that out, he had a video where it was titled, When You Know You've Joined the Wrong Movement or Protest, and he actually had a joke about that, where people were chanting, and then the chant starts to change, and then you realize, like, oops, I think I joined the wrong movement. This comes to mind when I look at her writing, because to assume that the tribal peoples like trans people is quite absurd, actually. If that were true, then there wouldn't be as much violence towards those people. More indigenous folks are highly patriarchal, highly spiritual, and they have more concepts of demonology. But I know that there's liberal anthropologists and archaeologists who try to lie and slander the tribal peoples who've lost their oral culture, that somehow they were grass-munching hippies who believed sodomy was okay and drag was okay, which just doesn't make sense when you look at how men had a specific test and trial to become a man, and the men becoming warriors and the women staying behind and doing things. I mean, they have I bet you they have zero data to support what percentage of the tribes that were here in this, 14th, 15th century had openly drag males, right, in their tribes. I don't really see that as happening. But they rewrite history, so we'll leave it at that. But just notice how these people write in a way that it's like a riddle. They really try to spin their threads. Because remember, in the previous chapters, she was very anti white heterosexual Christian male. But she says nothing about straight Arab Muslims or straight black Muslims from Egypt, Somalia, Yemen, you name it. So you can see how she knows how to cleverly structure her arguments. That matters. It matters because if we don't know our history, we can't learn from it, and those who can't learn from history are doomed to speak in ignorant cliches and to live them too. So those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it is a cliche, so she kind of rephrased it to include the cliche, which is pretty witty. When she talks about we don't know our history, but then tries to, really bring in the Rainbow Mafia philosophy, I really gotta wonder about that. But something is changing. Suddenly, a great many unspoken things are being uttered, softly at first, and then building to an uncomfortable crescendo. Young people are no longer prepared to accept the popular consensus about whose stories get to matter. So, popular consensus about whose stories get to matter. The thing about that, though, is the cream should rise to the top, and you can get lost in the weeds if you focus on every tiny violin. The notions of race and gender, as we have come to understand them, however they may mark themselves on our bodies, have been refined over generations to justify and excuse exploitation, colonial conquests, and inequality. This does not mean that race and gender are not things we know and experience in our bodies. These things are stories we tell each other about who gets to be human on what terms in this world, and ignorance of history leaves those who steer culture free to write and rewrite the story of what it means to be a decent man, a strong woman, a good girl. Inevitably, those definitions seem to settle around the outlines of what it means to be an obedient citizen, a docile worker, or a compliant subject. Now, let's break this down real quick. Okay. Docile worker. This one is interesting because I know how she's framing it. You want to be really accurate about your job and be able to voice up injustices and concerns with your manager and be able to help things become better. But at the same time, if you're a manager and you are trying to get your workers to perform because you have a set plan that you're going to launch and none of them are listening, it's going to be quite difficult. I remember when I was in the restaurant industry, really good chefs and managers would call all the servers together. They would go through the menus special, right? Oh, what seafood we're going to have, what's going to be the wine, and they would break it down with us. Communication was key. And they had a set way of letting us know how it was going to go and delegating stuff like that. Us listening made all our jobs easier. When you have a crooked wheel that, it's really hard to push the shopping cart because it's going to go here, it's going to go there, and you got to work harder to steer it. Now, I did see, obviously, dishwashers. They deserved more empathy, but their docility sometimes did lead to their exploitation because they wouldn't be able to ask for a second dishwasher. You would see piles of dishes going up, and it's hot in there, and they'd be too shy to ask for a fan. I remember I asked the manager, "Can you please get so and so a fan back there? It's all congested, hot, humid dish soap air. It's really unpleasant. It's really quite tight and humid, and us in the front here have air conditioning with, the customers and whatnot." And she did, and that was kind of her, the female manager who did that. But sometimes a worker can become so docile they don't know how to advocate for themselves. So I see both sides. Learn to be a worker who can still advocate for yourself, but be agreeable. But sometimes when you know a chef is really screwing up, you have to be like, okay, I might lose my job, but what you're doing is wrong here. Especially if they're lying. You know, like if they're like, what would I mean by that is, let's say they're saying the salmon is wild, but it's actually farmed, and they're telling you to lie to the customer, and they're charging more. It's unethical. Sure, you can lie, but sometimes you have to be like, I'm gonna complain to management that you're lying. You'd be surprised how much they lie. It should be illegal, but docile workers sometimes won't hold corruption accountable. So I get it. It's a nuanced conversation. Now, obedient citizen. That one is another tricky one because if you look at how China has their social credit score, it looks like a Black Mirror episode. But then again, when you look at the Black Lives Matter, when they did their rioting, at first I was like, this is going to lead to change. And then I just saw pure destruction. Nothing was really solved. Just garbage everywhere, things burnt down, and people just filled with hate. And there was not a system to replace it. The politicians didn't really care. All the Twitter campaigns and hashtags did nothing. Things just really got worse because they defunded police, which led to more crime and woke criminal law, which is a whole nother conversation. So I get how there's wisdom and you want things to be harmonious in society. You don't want to have just a blind dead herd, but you can't just have a barrel full of crabs and they're all trying to pull each other down, and it's insane. There's an ebb and flow for sure. Because you want to hold your government and your politicians accountable, but you want to do it, I'd argue, in a way that doesn't put the economy at risk. Because when your security breaks down, things just turn loose. I'll never forget those riots I saw in South Africa. It was maybe about a year or something ago, and this farmer had all his goats and chickens stolen, and people destroyed and were looting stupid things like shoes and purses. The businesses closed, jobs were done, and then all those people who were rioting and destroyed everything were standing in the food line for United Nations food aid. So their rioting did absolutely nothing besides get them a couple pair of shoes and shirts. But now they've destroyed everything, and people don't want to have a business there because they can't control their emotions, and they allow their rage to burn everything down, like Daenerys Stormborn in King's Landing. Right? So riots don't work as much. I used to think they do, but now that I've seen so many, I'm like, I don't really think this works anymore. So when she mentions obedient citizen, docile worker, compliant subject, you really have to look at it from a serious perspective and see what you're advocating for. Let me know what you think. In order for power to be able to face itself in the mirror, certain things must be shunted down the collective memory hole. This is a normal response to trauma, especially other people's trauma. For a long time, one of the special privileges of being part of the group that got to write history has been not having to read the footnotes. This applies whether you're a man, a white person, a straight person, a wealthy person, American, European, or any other class of human being usually guaranteed a speaking role in the long, weird hero's drama of recent history. She really infantilizes non-whites, I'd argue. Because see, man, white, straight, wealthy, American or European. So she attacks whites as a really huge group. There's plenty of poor whites. One of my cousins, I have a huge family, but grew up in a trailer park, and we used to play in the trailer park and run along the train tracks in Utah, and it was quite normal. It's strange how some of her assertions act like whites are not, suffering with poverty. Eating bologna from bar bologna out of the package, and just Kraft cheese singles, being absolutely nuts during the summer. it's quite fascinating how she just really finds a way to divide everyone. She doesn't talk about rich blacks, only rich whites. Doesn't talk about rich Asians, but talks about rich whites. So is she really trying to get at truth here? Everyone has a speaking role, but not everyone should. I really do think that you earn your soapbox. You can't let everyone be a Cicero if they haven't put in the work to be the Cicero. I think that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to have a voice, He will let you have one. That's what I'd argue. Everyone else is obliged to protect you from the knowledge of what it took to keep you there, for their own good as much as yours. So what it takes to keep an empire running, how the sausage is made, as they say, is intense. Don't look away. Now, what I think she's not recognizing, I think, about the darker side of human nature is people can see how the sausage is made and still say the means justify the end. It must be done. Sometimes sacrifices must be made. And when you're in the position of power, it is such a tough role because even in religious texts you see that war must be had. And there's rules to war, but the war must still occur. And someone must die. And death is messy, especially for the soldiers. So, if you're teaching the history of war, show it. Why not? It makes the citizens' stomach stronger. Sheltering. I think they did that in Vietnam, where they showed the caskets of the soldiers coming home. The support started changing for the war, so they decided to change the rules on showing the soldiers' caskets coming back, so that it could be out of sight, out of mind. That strategy really worked when it came to the wars in the Middle East. Because they were able to have a war in Afghanistan, over 20 years. So the people were just working, almost totally forgot we even were sending soldiers there. And so it was allowed to go on longer because they didn't see the cost of the war. They only had their taxes extracted, and then social media would censor it or put you on a list as a threat to homeland security, right? So it's quite fascinating. It's quite fascinating when you look at, should the people see? I think it makes a more cold-blooded soldier, I'd argue, to be able to see, like, if you have I don't know, okay, hold on. They say that the Athenians and the Spartans of Greece, and the Macedonians and whatnot, and the Romans, they didn't hide war from their populace. And that was part of the reason why they were such good soldiers for a while. Warring natures make more formidable opponents because they're less fearful. Now, if you had some vegan, soy boy, really effeminate men who don't even want to step on a bug, obviously their sensibilities are not going to make them necessary soldiers like a Delta Force or the Marines, right? You have to be able to have those unsullied Dothraki type of warriors who are going to go in and get the job done. But you also want to have a bit of empathy. So there's a balance there, and when she mentions obliged to protect you from the knowledge of what it took to keep you there, I'd say let the people see. That's why I like true crime, and I like looking at cemeteries, and I like thinking about that life, because you get to see what humans are capable of, and you realize you're not in Disneyland. Everything on this earth must struggle and strive. There's so much beauty, but there's still a lot of rawness. You must be careful. So, be in your tower for a while, guarded by the dragon, but eventually you gotta get on your horse and go outside the palace walls and see under the rock. Let the people see, I'd argue. There's certain certain ages you show certain things. But I let my little one watch Warfare, but she's not gonna watch something where there's excessive romance. And liberals are different, usually. They show excessive, inappropriate sexual innuendos and stuff, graphic sexual education, but then don't show war movies. So, you know, that's a different mindset. When it's overwhelmingly conservative Republican Christians who go into the military to make a soft life for those who are more likely to just stay behind. So they actually get protected, while those who have to witness it come back with their tails, and then no one wants to hear what the soldier had to say because they don't want to be demoralized for what's really out there. But I'd argue that if you see what's really out there, you must speak it. But there's a certain level of how much truth you're going to put on a person. You have to see how much that person is willing to handle, right? You can't just dump too much information on them and not give them a way to pace it. It's quite an interesting thing. I don't know why she calls it weird heroes drama, because the heroes are the ones who do good, and they must face quite a lot of opposition in order to be heroes. Really quite fascinating. Let me know what you think about what she said. If you'd like to join my blog, it's www.subscribestar.com/MilahanArchive. Hope to see you there.